Morning in the highlands wasn't gentle. It didn't ease you awake with warmth or color. It arrived like a searchlight, cold, pale, and unforgiving, turning every ridge into a blade and every shadow into a warning. Snow had fallen in the night, but the wind had bullied it into submission. It clung in thin sheets to rock faces, packed into gullies, and dusted the wadi floor until every footprint looked like an accusation. The air had that hard, dry bite that made your lungs feel smaller than they were. Every breath came out as a brief cloud that lingered just long enough to betray you. Lieutenant Markham lay on his side behind a boulder that offered more comfort in theory than in reality. He kept his helmet low, cheek pressed to stone, listening to the battlefield like it was a language he could decipher if he tried hard enough. Above him, tracer rounds cut bright orange lines across the white, stitching the lip of the wadi in frantic patterns. The sound was sharp in the cold. Rifle cracks like snapped sticks, the heavier thump of a machine gun, and the occasional brutal cough of an RPG launch. The wadi was supposed to be a quick route back, a shortcut carved by old water and older weather. From above, it looked like shelter. From inside, it was a trench with no ceiling and too many angles. The ridgeline owned every exit. It owned time. 2 o'clock. Saddle, the point man shouted, his voice raw from effort and fear. His words didn't finish, not because he changed his mind. A burst tore through the air and forced him down. The rocks above his position spat chips that stung exposed skin. Then, almost at the same time, the patrol's radio screamed, an electronic shriek that made everyone flinch as if the sound itself could cut them. Specialist Rourke stared at the handset in his gloved hands like it had suddenly turned into something alive and hostile. He slapped it, checked the antenna, switched channels with quick, practiced fingers. The result was the same. A thin hiss, empty as a dead room. Jammed, Rourke said. He tried to keep his voice steady, but disbelief thinned it. Active. Strong. Markham keyed his mic anyway, because commanders did that when they were supposed to, even when they already knew it wouldn't work. Sunray, Whiskey 2-1, contact. Only hiss answered. No relay. No distant voice. Nothing that could be mistaken for help. Alternate, Markham ordered, because the order itself was a rope to hold on to. Rourke switched again. A flicker of static, almost like a doorway, cracking open. Then it slammed shut. His eyes lifted to Markham, wide in a way that asked a question neither of them wanted to say out loud. They're blocking the alternates too, Rourke muttered, like they had the list. The machine gun above them found its rhythm and kept it. Short, controlled bursts that punished movement. The gunner wasn't spraying. He was timing. The moment a helmet rose, the ridge answered with a burst that cut the air where a face would have been. Markham's men were good. Not special forces legends. Not recruits. Just tired professionals who had done the same kinds of patrols for months. They knew how to find cover. They knew how to breathe. They knew how to return fire in disciplined strings instead of panic dumping magazines into the sky. And still they were pinned. Doc Jansen crawled over ice grit toward a rifleman who had gone down near a smaller rock, too exposed for comfort. Jansen moved in the ugly way medics moved in firefights, fast but low, shoulders hunched, making himself small while his mind stayed big and calm. He reached the wounded man, gripped the straps of his plate carrier, and hauled him backward inch by inch. Blood smeared across the snow in dark streaks that steamed faintly. Jansen's hands were slick, but he didn't fumble. Fear was allowed later. Function was now. Above, an RPG whooshed and detonated against a shelf of rock. The blast shook loose shale and packed snow that slid down into the wadi with a grinding roar. It wasn't a full avalanche, but it didn't need to be. It buried the easiest retreat route behind a wall of debris and broken stone. Another rocket followed, closer. The enemy wasn't firing blindly. They were walking the impacts inward, narrowing the space like a fist closing. They're shaping, Sergeant Hale said, his voice low and clipped. He was older than Markham by a decade and carried it in his eyes. Less surprise, less hope, more ruthless acceptance. They're not trying to kill us quick. They're pushing us. Markham pressed his forehead to the boulder for half a second, letting the cold bite his skin like a reminder to stay awake. Push us where? Hale didn't answer immediately. A burst cracked overhead. Snow puffed from the wadi lip. Somewhere above, someone shouted in a language Markham didn't understand, and the sound carried too clearly in the thin air. Hale finally said, "Toward the choke." Markham looked down the wadi, toward where the walls tightened and the floor rose, toward a narrow bend that was the natural funnel of the terrain. He felt his stomach tighten. A choke meant a capture point, a place you didn't want to be if someone had planned ahead. He was about to speak when something happened that didn't fit the pattern. A single sound, so small, so controlled, almost wasn't a sound at all, cut through the violence like a thread through cloth. A suppressed crack, far above and far off, swallowed by wind. The Ridge machine gun stuttered mid-burst. The steady rhythm broke. For a heartbeat, the air above the wadi felt wider. Markham's eyes snapped upward just in time to see the gunner's silhouette jerk and collapse out of sight, like someone had hooked him from behind. Rourke whispered, "What?" Before the question could form, another near-silent crack. An enemy figure crouched beside a backpack, antenna folded sideways, and went still. The antenna dipped. The electronic hiss in Rourke's handset wavered, shifted pitch, as if a hand had briefly eased off a throat, then returned to full choke. A third crack. An RPG carrier rose to move and simply pitched forward. His launcher clattered down rock with a sharp, bell-like ring that sounded obscene against gunfire. The enemy's volume dipped. Not much, just enough to feel it. Markham's men looked at each other, confused, suspicious, hopeful in the way you became hopeful when you couldn't afford it. Markham leaned closer to Hale, lowering his voice until it was almost lost in the wind. "Who's up there?" No friendly call sign answered. No radio check. No voice. Only the wind moving over snow and rock, and the enemy's sudden, uneasy shift, like they had realized the fight had gained a ghost. Hours earlier, before the wadi became a trap, the patrol had staged in a shallow basin below the relay site. Morning then had looked much like this morning. Pale light, hard air, snow that squeaked under boots when you stepped wrong. The relay mass stood against the sky like a thin, stubborn tree made of metal. It fed a string of sensors scattered across the highlands, quiet devices that listened for movement, log patterns, and watched routes no one wanted to admit existed. The briefing had been short because it was supposed to be simple. Swap batteries, confirm cache, the operations warrant had said, tapping a map with a gloved finger. Escort the sealed case back to base. We want it in Intel's hands before noon. Keep it tight. Don't get clever. Markham had nodded, already thinking about time. A short flight window for extraction support later. Weather moving in by afternoon. A schedule to meet. His patrol had the usual pieces. Hale as the steady spine. Rourke as the voice and ears. Doc Jansen as the hands that kept people alive. And a handful of riflemen. Tired, competent, quietly joking to keep the cold from getting inside their bones. And then there was the attachment. She stood slightly apart, adjusting straps with quick, economical movements. No wasted motion. No unnecessary talk. Compact in her winter gear, face mostly hidden under a hood and scarf. Eyes the only thing that seemed fully exposed. While others checked rifles and laughed about lukewarm coffee, she crouched, pinched grit between her fingers, and watched how it drifted. A rifleman, Cole, always the loudest when he was nervous, had nudged another and muttered, "They really sent a shooter for a battery swap?" Overkill. Someone else had said, "Maybe she's here to fix the relay," because she spoke so little that people filled the silence with assumptions. She didn't correct them. She didn't smile. Hale, though, had greeted her with a different tone. Not friendly exactly. Respectful, quiet, like speaking too loudly would spoil something. Markham had noticed a patch half hidden under her sleeve, the edge of a symbol he didn't recognize. He'd noticed a scar line that disappeared beneath her collar, pale against skin that the cold had turned slightly pink. He'd filed it away as "not my business" because he had a mission and a schedule. At the relay site, while Rourke worked the data cache and Jansen swapped batteries, she walked a slow circle around the area, not looking at the mass so much as the world around it. She stopped, stared at a high saddle cut between two ridges, and marked something on a small card tucked inside her glove. Markham had approached. See something? She didn't look away from the saddle. Line of sight, she said softly. That saddle sees too much. Markham had squinted at the ridgeline. It looked like 1,000 other pieces of rock. Noted, she crouched near the snow and brushed it aside with the back of a glove. Fresh scuffs. Boot marks. Not old. The edges were crisp. No friendlies up there, Hale said when she showed him. No, she agreed. Near dusk, when the light started to flatten and everything looked deceptively calm, she paused and stared at a far ridge. Markham followed her gaze and saw nothing. Then, for a split second, he caught it, a pinprick of metallic glint that didn't belong to snow or rock. Rourke had mentioned ghost pings on the radio band earlier, brief pulses like someone testing. Markham, feeling the press of time, had waved it off. Probably atmospheric. Keep moving. When the sealed case transferred hands, Markham felt the weight through the handle. Too heavy for simple logs. He kept it close because that's what you did with sealed cases. He didn't ask what was inside because he didn't need to know. He just needed to deliver it. The attached shooter watched him, eyes steady. No judgment, just attention. Before they stepped off, she wiped her optic with a cloth, so clean it looked absurd in the snow. She checked her suppressor alignment by feel, not sight. She counted magazines, and then, with the smallest pause, set aside 2 rounds in a separate pocket, different brass, slightly longer profile. Markham had seen the motion and ignored it because people had habits. Then they moved, down into the wadi route for speed. The terrain felt safe because it sheltered them from wind. It felt efficient because it cut distance. It also felt like a funnel. At the first hint of contact, a distant crack, a whip of sound above them, she lagged half a beat behind the formation. Not fear, positioning, like she was already playing a move the rest of them hadn't realized existed. Now, back in the present, Markham realized what she must have seen. The enemy's fire wasn't random. It shifted like a hand guiding a piece on a board. When his riflemen tried to push left, the machine gun punished that angle. When they tried right, RPGs snapped into the space. Every attempt to break out met a response that felt pre-planned. They were being herded toward the choke. "Ammo!" Hale barked. "2 mags!" Cole shouted. "3," another voice. Rourke, still fighting the radio, shook his head. "Nothing. They're sitting on us." Jansen pressed gauze into a wound, teeth clenched. "I can keep them stable, but we need out. Now." Markham glanced at his watch. The extraction window wasn't a guarantee. It was a narrow corridor of possibility. Rotor support could hold only so long in these mountains, especially with hostile fire and weather threats. They had maybe minutes before the window started to close like a door. And the enemy knew it. That was the sickening part. Markham lifted the sealed case to shift it into better cover. The moment it moved, tracer fire intensified in that direction. A burst snapped against the boulder's edge, showering him with powdered rock and snow. Hale saw it too. His eyes narrowed. They're tracking that case. Markham's throat tightened. "They want it. Or they want you," Hale said grim. Markham swallowed hard. He didn't like hearing that out loud. The attached shooter, still unseen, fired again. A quiet crack. An enemy spotter toppled from a ledge. Another crack. A man who'd been waving others forward dropped his arm and fell backward. The shots didn't feel like random saves. They felt like edits. Like someone was cutting the enemy's strings one by one. Markham took the smallest risk, lifting his head a fraction to scan the ridge. The light was too bright, the snow too reflective. Anyone up there should have been visible. And yet, nothing. The enemy reacted, though. Their shouts changed. More urgent. Less confident. A few rounds snapped higher, probing above the wadi as if searching for the shooter's perch. Then came a new sound, a faint, insect-like buzz that didn't belong in nature. A small quadcopter rose from behind a rock shelf on the ridgeline, its dark shape stark against the snow. It hovered, then drifted, scanning. "Hunting." "Drone," Rourke hissed. Markham's skin crawled. In this terrain, a drone wasn't just an eye. It was a clock. It meant the enemy had enough resources to spend on finding a ghost while still keeping a patrol pinned. It meant they planned to finish this properly. Stay under cover, Hale ordered. No silhouettes. Cole, breath fast, whispered, "We're dead if that thing finds her." Markham realized he'd accepted the premise without thinking, that there was a her, that the unseen shooter was the attached operator, the quiet one, which made the bigger question sharper. Why wasn't she on comms? Markham's mind flashed to the morning at the relay site. Her comm ritual, the way she'd set aside those 2 rounds, the way she'd marked the saddle. He'd brushed it off as habit. Now it felt like prophecy. The gunfire surged again, enemy confidence returning in the places where they could still control the wadi. The drone drifted lower, angling toward the lip. In the wadi, morale fractured in visible ways. One rifleman started to push forward, desperate to break the kill zone by speed. Another froze, unable to move under the weight of fire. Jansen cursed, trying to keep a tourniquet tight with hands that wanted to shake. Markham opened his mouth to issue an order and realized he didn't have a good one. Protocol said call for support. Protocol said coordinate air. Protocol said don't split the unit. Protocol didn't mean much when the radio was a dead hiss and the ridgeline was a vice. Then Hale raised 2 fingers, a signal Markham recognized. Hold. Markham stared at him. What? Hale didn't look away from the wadi lip. Because she said so. Markham blinked. Hale's eyes flicked to Markham for the briefest moment. There was something there, an old memory, a recognition he hadn't shared. Trust it, sir. Markham swallowed his protest. He trusted Hale. Hale trusted the quiet shooter. That was enough for now. Up above, unseen, the shooter made her choice. She didn't fire for a moment. The silence was heavy, a pause in the violence that felt unnatural. Then another suppressed crack, farther away than before, shifted angle. The drone, as if confused, hovered and adjusted. Its buzzing thick in the air. Markham felt the enemy's focus shift too. Their burst climbed. Their fire pattern changed, probing higher ground. Shouts sharpened. They had realized the shots weren't coming from a wadi. They were coming from somewhere else. The patrol didn't see her move, but they felt the fight's pressure change in subtle waves, as if the enemy's grip tightened, then loosened, then tightened again. Later, Markham would understand that she had climbed during those moments, moving when the machine gun fired, freezing when it paused, using the wind's gusts to swallow the soft crunch of snow. She took a route no one in the patrol would have chosen, a steep scree traverse up the wadi's side, where loose shale hid under powder and a wrong step could send a cascade that would announce her like a siren. She stripped weight to make it possible, ditched anything that could clink, taped a buckle that had a habit of tapping metal, secured her sling so it wouldn't scrape rock. She made herself as close to silent as a human could be. A shepherd structure sat near the choke. Low stone walls capped with snow, a place that might shelter animals or people or both. She saw it and felt the moral weight settle on her shoulders like an extra pack. There would be no wild shots today. No close enough. The cold demanded precision. The terrain demanded it. And the possibility of civilians demanded it more. The drone swept overhead once, close enough that she could hear the tiny motors change pitch. She slid into a narrow rock seam and went still. Dust and snow drifted off her sleeve like smoke. The drone passed, unseeing, and moved on. When she reached her perch, she didn't feel triumph. She felt math. The ledge was cold and mean, a narrow shelf on the shadow side of the ridgeline. The side enemy fighters assumed was protected from valley fire. From here, she could see into pockets of cover that were hidden from the wadi. She could see the support elements tucked behind rocks, an operator hunched over a jammer pack, a spotter with binoculars, ammo carriers, and a small group positioned near the choke with restraints and a camera bag. Capture element, not just an ambush. A plan grab. The sealed case wasn't the only prize. The lieutenant carrying it was part of the package. She watched for 30 seconds, an eternity in a firefight, and confirmed the truth. Their objective was to seize the data module, take a high-profile captive, and record it before the extraction window closed. A propaganda victory timed with precision. A story they could broadcast. The idea made her jaw tighten, but her breathing stayed slow. Fear could exist in the body, but couldn't be allowed in the hands. She set her target ladder in her mind the way someone might set a prayer. First, the jammer operator. Second, the crew-served guns assistant. Third, the RPG team. Fourth, the spotters and leaders. Fifth, the drone handler. Force multipliers first. Always. She lined up the jammer operator through her optic, noting the way he moved, confident, sheltered, unaware he was visible from this angle. Her finger took up slack. The shot was a brief, suppressed crack. The operator collapsed sideways. The jammer pack sagged with him. Down in the wadi, Rourke's handset changed its hiss for the fraction of a second. Whiskey 2. A broken voice flickered, so faint it could have been imagination. Rourke snapped upright. "Sir, window." "Transmit," Markham ordered, heart punching his ribs. Rourke keyed up, forcing his voice through static. "Whiskey 2-1, contact, pinned in wadi request." The line died again, but it didn't matter. The attempt itself meant someone, somewhere, might have caught enough. Above, enemy fire lost its clean timing for a heartbeat. Bursts overlapped poorly. The machine gun rhythm stuttered. Confusion crept into their coordination like sand in gears. The shooter shifted to the crew-served position. She didn't aim for the gunner this time. She aimed for the assistant, the one feeding ammo, the one keeping the rhythm alive. The suppressed crack sounded almost polite. The assistant folded, the belt slackened, and the machine gun's cadence went jagged. In the wadi, Hale felt it instantly. "Move the wounded," he snapped. Jansen and another rifleman dragged the injured men deeper into cover, inches at a time. Markham helped, ignoring the sting of ice against his gloves, ignoring the snap of rounds overhead. The shooter paused between shots, listening. In a firefight, leadership had a sound. Not always words. Sometimes it was who others looked at before they moved. Sometimes it was who pointed. Sometimes it was the one who never fired because his job wasn't to shoot, it was to direct. She found him. He was the figure near the choke who stayed low and still, eyes constantly moving, hands signaling in sharp motions. Others shifted when he moved. Others paused when he paused. His weapon remained unused, as if shooting was beneath him. "Commander." The drone buzz intensified, pivoting as if it sensed it was being hunted by something smarter than it was. On the ridgeline, two climbers peeled away from cover and began moving along the shadow side, hugging rock, coming toward her perch in a slow, determined crawl. They had adapted. They had realized the angle. Her optic began to fog from the warmth of her breath, meeting cold glass. It was a small problem that could become a fatal one. She wiped once with a cloth, quick and controlled, knowing the movement risked silhouette. The drone swept lower. She changed priorities without panic. The drone handler was crouched near a flat rock, eyes on a small controller. He was absorbed, confident, convinced the drone would find the shooter and end the mystery. She exhaled halfway and fired. The handler dropped. The controller slipped from his hands. The drone's buzz wavered, then drifted aimlessly for 2 seconds before it clipped a rock and shattered, pieces scattering on snow like broken insects. Minutes bought, but the climbers kept coming. Protocol would have told her to relocate immediately. A shooter who stayed in one spot after firing multiple times was a dead shooter. But relocation would mean losing the angle on the choke and the support pocket, losing the ability to dismantle the net while the patrol below still needed air. She chose a thin line between rules. She stayed, but she made the enemy think she moved. A mirrored shard, small, bright, sat in her pocket. She flicked it downslope with a careful motion, sending it sliding across snow until it caught the morning sun and flashed. The climbers' heads snapped toward it. They shifted their approach vector, creeping toward the false glint. She kept her muzzle still, her body flat, and waited for the next opening. Below, with comms flickering in and out, Markham managed to push a fractured message through. Position, casualties, extraction adjustment. It wasn't a clear conversation. It was a thrown rope. Somewhere beyond the ridgeline, rotor support acknowledged with a clipped, broken reply. Enough to suggest they were coming, but the window was tightening. Hale organized the patrol into a controlled peel, the kind of disciplined movement that looked slow until you realized it was the only way to not die. 2 riflemen covered. 2 moved. Wounded dragged in short bursts. Every pause was a gamble. Every bound was a decision against fear. The enemy tried to regain control with heavier weapons. A mortar team began bracketing likely exits, sending thumps that punched snow into the air in white eruptions. Each impact was a warning. Move wrong, and you'll be buried. The shooter watched the mortar spotter, another force multiplier, scan and signal. She watched him adjust, confident he could lock the patrol in place. Then she returned to the commander. This was what her 2 last resort rounds were for. Not magic, not superstition, but capability. They were designed to keep performance and penetration when conditions and cover tried to steal it. When a decisive shot mattered more than conserving anything. The commander rose slightly, arm extended in a sharp signal. She fired. The suppressed crack was small. The effect was enormous. The commander dropped mid-gesture, collapsing as if the ridge itself had taken offense. For a heartbeat, no one around him moved, like a machine pausing when its motor dies. Then the enemy's cohesion broke. Bursts went wild. Shouts overlapped. Fighters who had been disciplined now fired emotionally, as if volume could replace direction. The capture element hesitated at the choke, suddenly unsure whether to push or retreat. The mortar team paused, bracketing lost without clear correction. The shooter didn't let the moment drift. She shifted and put a clean shot into the mortar lead/spotter. The man crumpled. The mortar fire faltered, uncertain. Then she went still. Silence wasn't absence. It was pressure. It was the feeling the enemy couldn't shake, that something unseen still watched them, still measured them, still decided who got to stand up. In the wadi, Hale felt the gap like a door swinging open. Now he roared. The patrol surged. Smoke grenades hissed and bloomed, turning the white morning into a shifting curtain. The men moved in tight bounds, dragging wounded, keeping low, using every rock edge and shadow line like it was a lifeline. Markham ran with the sealed case pressed to his chest, each breath burning, each step a fight against snow and terror. Behind them, the enemy tried to reorganize, but without the commander's hand they were late. Late to adjust fire, late to coordinate, late to exploit. Above, the climbers reached the shooter's earlier perch and found nothing, only cold rock and wind. They stared at the empty ledge like it had mocked them. Their heads turned, scanning for a ghost that refused to exist where it was supposed to. The patrol reached the extraction pickup line as the rotor sound grew from distant thunder to immediate violence. Snow whipped in wild spirals as the aircraft dropped low, engines howling, the downdraft flattening the world. The crew chief's arm signaled. Fast, frantic, get in now. Markham shoved the wounded aboard first. Jansen climbed in with them, still holding pressure on a bandage. Still moving like function was the only language he knew. Hale covered the ramp with short, controlled bursts, then hauled himself inside. Markham stepped in last, the sealed case still in his hands. He turned his head, searching the ridgeline instinctively, wanting to put eyes on the person who had rewritten the morning. Then he saw her, briefly, moving along a lower slope, not running, not panicking, simply relocating with the same calm she'd had at the relay site. For a second, her face turned toward the aircraft, and the light caught the line of that collar scar. She didn't wave. She didn't signal. She didn't ask for applause. She just moved, quiet as wind over snow. The aircraft lifted, banking hard as rounds snapped up from below. The ridgeline shrank. The wadi became a pale cut in the earth again, as if nothing had happened there. Inside the dim cabin, the patrol sat in a stunned cluster. Hands shook in delayed waves. Faces were gray with dust and cold. Jansen checked the wounded again, as if repetition could guarantee life. Hale stared at the floor, jaw clenched, breathing controlled like he didn't trust himself to stop. Markham finally set the sealed case on his lap and looked across at the attached shooter. She sat slightly apart, rifle secured, posture relaxed but alert. Her gloves were scuffed with rock dust. Snow crystals clung to her sleeve. Her eyes looked tired in a way that wasn't new. For a long moment, no one spoke. In the roar of the aircraft, Silence felt louder than it should have. Markham leaned toward her. "You saved us." She blinked once, slow. "We moved," she said, as if that was all it was. Hale snorted softly, not quite a laugh. That's one way to put it. Cole, pale and wide-eyed, stared at her like she wasn't entirely real. "Why weren't you on comms?" he blurted, unable to keep it in. She glanced at Rourke's radio. "If they're listening, you don't feed them," she said simply. Rourke's mouth opened, then closed. He nodded once, as if a lesson had landed. Back at the forward base, the world felt warmer only because it wasn't trying to kill them at every second. The debrief room was harshly lit, smelling of stale coffee and damp gear. Markham sat at a table with Hale and Rourke and Jansen, while intel officers waited with a kind of focused hunger. The sealed case sat between them like a small bomb. Markham slid forward. An intel officer opened it carefully, revealing a compact data module nested in foam. Not just sensor logs, something denser. Route histories, pattern maps, a vulnerability outline of the network's blind spots and relay dependencies. The skeleton key to the highlands' quiet surveillance. Markham felt his throat tighten. That's why. The intel officer nodded grimly. If they get this, they can walk around every sensor we've placed. Or worse, feed it false patterns and lure patrols into predictable traps. He'll lean back, eyes cold, and then wanted a show. Another officer tapped a report. "We've intercepted chatter about a planned capture. High profile. They wanted a face. They wanted a voice. Proof they can reach into these mountains and pull someone out." Markham thought of the capture element at the choke. The camera bag. The restraints. His stomach turned. Rourke cleared his throat. Those ghost pings earlier, they were probing. Testing the band. The intel officer nodded again. Rehearsal. They didn't jam you to win a firefight. They jammed you to isolate you. To keep it clean. Across the room, the attached shooter leaned against a wall, rifle slung, expression unreadable. She looked like she'd rather be outside where wind could erase voices. Hale's eyes lingered on her, then shifted away as if it hurt to look too long. Markham noticed and finally asked, softly, "You knew?" Hale's jaw flexed. "I heard a story," he said. "Years back. Different valley. Different unit. A patrol got hit bad. No comms. No help. And somebody, one shooter, cut the enemy's force multipliers like trimming wire. Saved the unit. Then disappeared from the paperwork." Markham glanced at the shooter. "That was you." She didn't answer. She didn't deny it either. Hale continued, voice low. "I recognize the patch edge on her sleeve. I recognize the way she checks wind with grit. I recognize the quiet." One of the intel officers tried to steer the conversation into formal lanes. "We'll need a statement. We'll need a document." The shooter's gaze flicked to him, calm and flat. Not hostile, just unbending. The officer paused, suddenly aware he was trying to put a name on something that had survived by staying unnamed. Markham cleared his throat. She should be recognized. The shooter finally spoke, voice still soft. "The unit should," she said. "They held. They moved. They didn't break." Jansen looked down at his hands, still stained faintly despite cleaning. "We almost did," he admitted. "But you didn't," she replied. Markham leaned forward. "You held fire near the shepherd structure," he said, remembering the angle she'd had, the shots she hadn't taken. "You could have." "I saw it," she said. "Could have been empty. Could have been a family. I wasn't guessing." Hale nodded once, approval deep and quiet. The debrief ended the way debriefs always did. Papers, timelines, clipped acknowledgments. But something had shifted in the patrol. Not loud, not celebratory, more like a reordering. A new understanding of what competence looked like when it didn't ask permission to exist. Outside, snow still ruled the world. Wind moved over the base perimeter and across the distant ridges with indifferent patience. The mountains looked the same as they had in the morning, cold, beautiful, dangerous. Markham found her near the edge of the compound, standing where she could see the highlands. She held a mug of coffee, but didn't drink it. Her rifle lay beside her, as natural as a shadow. He stopped a few steps away, unsure how close he was allowed to get. "Lieutenant," she said without turning, acknowledging him like she'd known he was there the whole time. "You could have let us walk into that choke, Markham said quietly. If you weren't there, I was there, she replied, simple as breath. Markham swallowed. They underestimated you. She turned her head slightly. The morning light caught the faint line of that scar at her collar. Her eyes were steady, tired but steady. That's not new, she said. He hesitated, then asked the question that had been eating him since the first suppressed crack broke the machine gun rhythm. How did you know? About the saddle. About the route. She looked out at the ridgeline, eyes scanning the geometry like it was printed on the air. Terrain tells the truth, she said. People lie. Plans lie. Terrain doesn't. Markham nodded slowly. And the enemy? They were prepared, she said. They tested the band. They set the jam. They built the trap around what you had to carry. The case, Markham murmured. And the story, she added. They wanted a story more than a kill. Markham felt anger rise, hot against the cold. They almost got it. She looked at him then, fully. They didn't. He found himself wanting to say more. Thank you. You saved my men. You saved me. But the words felt too small for what had happened. Praise felt like noise. So he tried something else. Hale said your name wasn't in the reports, he said carefully. Is that what you want? Her gaze drifted back to the mountains. Sometimes the work needs quiet, she replied. And sometimes the unit needs to know who carried them out, Markham said. She didn't answer immediately. Wind tugged at her hood. Snow hissed across the ground in thin sheets. Finally, she said, they know now. Markham let that sit between them. The truth of it warmed him more than the base heaters ever could. His patrol had looked at her in the aircraft with awe and confusion, and now with something steadier, respect. Not hero worship, recognition of competence that had been there all along. Behind them, inside the base, life resumed its routine. Radios crackled. Boots crunched. Someone laughed too loudly in a hallway. The world insisted on normal. She lifted her mug and finally took a sip, as if to prove she belonged to that normal too, even if only at the edges. Then she set the mug down, checked her rifle with a familiar, gentle efficiency, and adjusted a strap that didn't need adjusting. Markham watched her hands for a moment, steady, unhurried. The same hands that had made the loudest fight of their lives survivable through small, precise acts. He realized something then that settled in his chest like an anchor. The calm had not been the absence of fear. It had been discipline carried through fear. Function chosen over panic again and again, until the enemy's plan broke under the weight of its own certainty. Markham nodded to her. If you ever need anything. She cut him off with a quiet look that wasn't rude, just firm. Keep your people from getting predictable, she said. That's enough. He exhaled, a small cloud disappearing in the cold. Yes. She turned slightly as if to leave, then paused. For the first time, her voice softened in a way that hinted at something buried underneath all that control. Tell them, she said, not looking at him. The mountains don't care who you are. They care what you do. Markham watched her walk away along the perimeter, moving like she belonged to the wind more than the base. No dramatic exit, no lingering look back. Just a quiet figure disappearing into morning brightness, leaving behind a patrol that would never again mistake silence for weakness. The wind rose over the snowfield beyond the wire, whispering across rock and ridge with the same indifferent patience it had shown during the ambush. And Markham, standing there with cold in his lungs and gratitude in his bones, understood the final truth of it. In the loudest fight of their lives, the thing that carried them out had been quiet.